So thank you all for joining us today. My name is Ted Jackson with the Disability Organizing Network, or what we more fondly call in California the DOnetwork. We're a network of community organizers in the disability community across the state of California, from the independent living centers as well as volunteers. And we like to say that we organize for accessible communities wherever people with disabilities live, work, learn, shop, play, and vote. The DOnetwork is a program of California Foundation for Independent Living Centers, and that is the membership organization opened up to all the independent living centers across the state of California. You can check us out at www.disabilityorganizing.net or www.cfilc.org. We welcome you to today's webinar, Accessible Voter Education, and I'm excited for it because we're going to hear from some wonderful professionals about how candidates and campaigns can make their campaigns more accessible, to how voter education materials. And with that, I'm going to hand things off to Zach Baldwin from the American Association for People with Disabilities.
Great. Thanks so much, Ted. My name is Zach. I'm the Director of Outreach with the American Association of People with Disabilities and the manager of our national REV UP campaign. The REV UP campaign was launched in early 2016, and it's a nonpartisan initiative that coordinates with national, state, and local disability organizations to increase the political participation of people with disabilities while also engaging candidates and the media. Our focus is around voter registration, education, access, and engagement, and REV UP stands for Register, Educate, Vote, Use Your Power. We could go to the next slide. Here on this screen are some of the toolkits and guides that we released for 2018. You can find all of these available for free at aapd.com/RevUp. This webinar is the second in a series addressing various access barriers to the voting process. Our first webinar last month focused on voter registration, and we'll have a recording of that available soon. And our webinar next month on October 18th will focus on access barriers to actually casting a vote in whatever form that takes. But today we are focusing on access barriers to election information coming from campaigns, civic organizations, and election departments. We have a great lineup of guest presenters, including Sarah Blahovic, the Disability Vote Organizer with the National Council on Independent Living, Sue Hetrick, Executive Director of the Center for Disability Empowerment in Ohio, and Tarika Jennings, Attorney Advisor and ADA Coordinator with the DC Board of Elections. We'll have some time for question and answer with all of the speakers at the end of the webinar. And now I'd like to turn it over to our first presenter, Sarah Blahovic. Sarah, please go ahead.
Hi, everybody. As Zach said, I am the Disability Vote Organizer for the National Council on Independent Living. And today I would like to talk about making your voter information, particularly web information, print information, and I'll get a little bit into events, although I know another one of our wonderful presenters is going to be talking about event accessibility. All of this information comes from a guide that Nickel has produced, a free guide that's available on our website at nickel.org, ncil.org/campaign-guide. And this guide is called Including People with Disabilities in Your Political Campaign, a guide for campaign staff. And so this guide, just to preface, is a comprehensive look at including people with a number of different disabilities in your voting materials and in your volunteer process. And also how to interact with or begin to interact with the disability community at whatever level of office you're running or organization you're running, to find out what the local disability community in your area cares about, what their issues are, how to get them on your side. So this guide, although it's created with campaign staff in mind, we really did it with, it's been useful for campaigns and organizations alike. So a lot of this information can be adapted to settings outside the campaign world. And on this slide, I just have a picture of the front page of that guide. So on the next slide, yeah, we can keep going. Thank you. Just to preface with a little bit of information about accessibility, and I'm sure for some of you this is really you know, something that you're familiar with. Accessibility is not a one-size-fits-all, one-time only thing. And that's something that campaigns really need to understand, because you can't just go in and think about beforehand, oh, what do we need to do to make it accessible, and then just forget about it through the rest of your campaign. It really needs to be something that you integrate into your campaign or your organization, like you think about everything else. So whenever you're planning something or putting something new out there or figuring out how to interact with your community, you really need to integrate accessibility as a concept and as a priority. And this is not just for the benefit of voters with disabilities, which we are 1 in 6 voters in the United States. So that's a pretty big group. This is also about doing something that's good for your campaign, because if you're not accessible to voters with disabilities, you're not going to gain their support, because they can't find out about you, they can't be a part of your campaign. So it's really a two-way street of supporting them by giving them the information that they need and making sure that they are able to be included and access that information. And in return, you know, they'll be able to learn about your campaign and figure out if it's something that they want to support. Next slide, please. So starting with printed materials, obviously in campaigns, direct mail and campaign literature are a big part of the campaign process. And so whenever it comes to printed materials, there's a few things that you can do to make sure that they're accessible. All of these things, I do want to add a caveat, they're really dependent on what your campaign's budget is and the size of your campaign. Some of these things may not be, you know, necessary or appropriate based on running a local campaign, or they might be. So it's really something that you have to figure out within the context of your specific campaign or organization. So one of the easiest things you can do whenever you have campaign materials is to make sure that you're making large print copies of those materials to have available on request. And some of these, I do want to say, they're not just principles of accessibility, they're principles of universal design. So while they do benefit and they were created with people with disabilities in mind, they are something that benefits everybody. So for example, sticking to a simple design that's free of clutter with, you know, large text that's large enough to be readable, that's something that you'll read in every guide or learn about in every resource that you read about creating printed materials, is making sure that you have a really clean, clear design. And that's something that is beneficial for not only all of your voters, but you know, voters with cognitive disabilities or vision-related disabilities. Make sure that you have good color contrast between the text and the background. So you don't want to have, you know, really close colors on that, because some people with vision disabilities are going to have some challenges in being able to make that out. You want to use plain language, which, if you're not familiar with the concept of plain language, that's making sure that you use simple jargon-free language, which again is another universal design concept, because if you use language that everybody can understand, that's something that more people are going to be able to relate to. But again, it's especially helpful to people with cognitive disabilities or intellectual and developmental disabilities. And of course, if you upload your materials to your website, make sure that you provide an accessible version of those materials. And there's a few different ways that you can do this. You can make an accessible PDF, which you can do in products like Adobe InDesign. You can make a Word or Google document, and you can even convert that to PDF after, if that's what you'd like to do. You could create create a plain text document, which there's a little bit of information that you need to know about how to organize that for screen reader accessibility, but that is a possibility. Next slide, please. So moving on to web information, your campaign website obviously is going to be one of the most important pieces that you have in your campaign, where you can go rally your supporters and give them information on your platform, and to get donations. So this all comes out of the guide again, in talking about accessible websites. I wanted to present the section in a way that is clear for people who don't have a tech background, but you are obviously going to need to talk to a web designer or someone on your team who's tech savvy and can learn how to implement these practices. Preferably, do that before the campaign starts. Make sure that whenever you're looking for a web developer or designer for your website, that they understand accessibility. You can ask them about the standard of accessibility right now is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG 2.0. And that's what all of these standards are really created through that. So here are 10 things to look for in your website, or to make sure if you're about to create a website, make sure that the designer knows to do these things or to fix. So the first issue is called skip navigation. So if your website probably has a bunch of links and menus and submenus at the top of the page, like on your platform or donating, things like that. For people who can see the screen easily, that's not a problem. You can go click on that link, or go, if you're using a tablet, touch that button. But for people who use screen reader technology, which converts the web page from the text and reads it out to you. So if you have a blindness, or if you have blindness or low vision or a mobility disability, you are able to hear the web page. They often use keyboard navigation to get around the page. So having something called skip navigation allows them to skip through those links quickly so they don't have to listen to all of that. So having skip navigation is one of the principles that you really need to integrate, so that you're not burdening those users with having to go through a lot of text. The second thing also pertains to screen readers. So if you have images, which I'm sure you do, on your website, screen readers obviously can't read an image. They can't tell you what the image is saying. So what alternative text is an HTML code behind, essentially, that picture that you can put a description, a caption of the image. Use colorful language to describe what the words what the picture says, or important facts about it. If you have any infographic, you're able to describe that. So you need to have alternative text so that people who are using screen readers can consume the information in your pictures, whether it's a text-heavy infographic or even just a picture of the candidate. Making sure that they can understand what's on there is really important. The third thing is using descriptive links. Whenever you hyperlink something, you don't want to just hyperlink the words "click here," because if someone's going through with a screen reader, they will often search by the first letter of the link to find it. So, if you're referencing a certain website, link the website's name, or link a certain resource that you're going to. Like if I was linking the Nickel campaign guide, I would link the title of the guide to the website so that people know what they're going to. Ability to increase and decrease font size is really helpful for disabled and non-disabled users alike, because it makes reading the page easier, but is especially helpful for people with low vision. Again, plain language is really important. Make sure that your website is jargon-free and in a style that's easy to understand. According to Harvard, there's a few concepts regarding plain language. So first, put your information in logical order with the important details first. Second, use an active and not a passive voice in your writing. So saying that you're doing something instead of something is being done, for example, and use familiar language and provide definitions for words that might be unfamiliar to your audience. The sixth is providing page headings. This is, again, part of the HTML code. That is a way that you organize content, or your web designer will organize content, so that people are able to easily skip through and understand where they are on the page. So that is, again, that goes back to HTML. Color contrast, again, like printed materials, make sure that you have a good contrast between text and the background of the web page so that people can clearly see the text. Label your form fields. So I'm sure that if you're a candidate or you have an email list to sign up for, you have some sort of form where you can put your name and your address and information in there. A lot of times these aren't labeled with what you actually put in the form field. So if you want someone to put their name and they're using a screen reader, they don't have any information on what they should be putting in there. And that means that you might miss a new communication or email list member or even a donation. So make sure that your form fields are labeled so that you're able to help them enter that information and actually get that information. This one is really simple, but surprisingly, so many candidates and organizations don't do this. Make sure to caption your videos. Closed captioning is essential for people who have hearing related, if they are deaf or hard of hearing, to be able to watch their videos. It could be a campaign advertisement or a town hall or just information about your campaign. They're not going to be able to hear it. And this is, again, an accessible, a universal design principle. About 80% of people on social media do not listen to videos. They actually just read the closed captioning because oftentimes they're in public and they don't want to, to make any noise from their phones. So you can do this on YouTube. You can create your own captions. There are many vendors out there who do captioning for you, whether it's an individual or a service like rev.com. You can easily type into Google captioning services and you'll get a whole host of different vendors that often provide $1 a caption minute or something like that. So make sure that you either are having a campaign staffer to do that or volunteer, or you are putting that into your budget. And then, of course, make sure that your design, again, is simple and clear. So this will benefit people with cognitive disabilities, again, or people who have sensory overload issues. But it's really helpful for everyone. And then we can go on to the next page. In terms of event accessibility, I'm really going to keep this short because I know another presenter is going to be presenting on this. But again, accessibility really needs to be included through the entire process. So whenever you're considering where you're going to have an event like a forum or a campaign event, whenever you're creating your event materials or registering people, you need to make sure that is accessible. Whenever you're setting up and running through programs and at event time, there's all considerations that you want to take into account. So next page. So again, this is, I think we can just go through these slides really quickly. Yeah, to the last page here. Yeah, that's good. So I'm gonna leave this for whoever is presenting on events. But I just want to say in the campaign guide, we actually have a checklist in the back that takes this material and makes it into a checklist that involves vetting the location, involves setting up and registration, and run through and day of setup. So that you're able to take this and consider every part of this process and what you might need to consider for different accessibility needs. So things like whether or not it's physically accessible from the outside and inside, as you see on this slide, or if you're having I mean, obviously your room setup as well, making sure that it's free and clear of obstacles, and that you might have an ADA section. Even if you're having food at the event, making sure that your any allergens are clearly labeled. So again, I just want to say that thank you for giving me the opportunity to present on this, and I would really encourage people to go to nickel.org/campaign-guide. And so that they can, get this information in more detail. We have all of these points in there, along with many free tools and resources that help you evaluate for accessibility and help you to make these fixes. So my information is on the screen. Feel free to contact me at my email address or my phone number, and also on the nickel.org/voting rights website, where we have links to all this information and links to important information for the 2018 election. So thank you very much.
Great, thanks so much, Sarah. And now our next speaker, Sue, please go ahead.
Sure, and I will not have a PowerPoint accompanying my comments here. A little background, we convened a group to start discussing a candidate forum in November of 2018, and some of the comments that I'm going to make aren't pertaining directly to accessibility, but just planning for and implementing a forum like this. I've been involved with the 2008 and 2012 candidate forum for people with disabilities, disability issues, featuring the presidential candidates. Worked with AAPD closely, and Nickel and several other entities on those, and those were held in Columbus, Ohio. So we decided this year we wanted to do something statewide, addressing the candidates for governor and the candidates for U.S. Senate. The U.S. Senate candidates were both incumbents. We did hold the event on July 26th, obviously on the 88th anniversary. Four of those candidates were invited. We did max out registrations for the room. The capacity was a little over 350. We had 360 registrants. We had to close the registration. Of the 360 registrants, approximately 225 actually came. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we addressed it through video, but we did have over 7,000 hits on the caption video, including the live stream that we did, and then the views of the archived video. Before I go any further, unless I forget, the archived video for this forum can be viewed on our CDE website, which is www.disabilityempowerment.net, or on the Center for Disability Empowerment's Facebook page. So you can see how this all came together. From the get-go, addressing inclusivity and accessibility, it was important that we put together a planning committee that was cross-disability, or representing cross-disability agencies and organizations, to make sure we address the needs of all people with disabilities. We did want statewide-ness. The longest distance for someone to travel to Columbus, which is in the central area of the state, was about 3 hours. So the needs of all the populations needed to be considered with regard just to the distance. So the planning team consisted of the 12 Centers for Independent Living in Ohio, the Ohio Silk, the Association of Area Agencies on Aging, our state P&A, the League of Women Voters of Ohio, the University of Cincinnati Center for Excellence in DD, which is the UCED, and the Coalition on Homelessness and Housing in Ohio. We set the goals for the event as threefold: to inform the disability community about the policy positions of candidates for Ohio Governor and the U.S. Senate, so that they could make an informed voting decision on Election Day, or before if they were voting then. To motivate the disability community to get out the vote, and to elevate the disability community and their policy issues and concerns to candidates or to legislators overall. Just as a side note, we wound up with 21 sponsors. It cost expenses wise about $18,300 to put the forum on. We were able to cover all of those expenses with a little padding, which we'll be using for Get Out the Vote activities going forward. So choosing the date and choosing the venue, obviously we had to consider accessibility issues. As I mentioned, some people, if they intended to come to Columbus for the event live, would be driving maybe 3 hours. So the time needed to be considered. We know that oftentimes we can't have things starting early in the morning. So we did deliberately start the event at 12:30 and went till 4:30, hopefully avoiding some of the rush hour at the end of the day. We had no real budget or weren't sure we could cover a budget for meals, but knowing that people might need to eat, we did provide snacks. We provided chips and pretzels and water and lemonade and some sodas. There was no cost to attendees for the event. The event venue was on the Ohio State University campus. Obviously, we screened it in depth for accessibility. I happen to have the ADA coordinator for Ohio State on my board, so he went over and checked it out, and we had a couple of other people do a site survey as well. Just as a side note on venue selection, in addition to the accessibility, a consideration is to make sure that the event site is neutral, is as politically neutral as possible and not affiliated or identified in some way with some kind of partisan demographic. We did end up packing the room. Like I said, we had a few less attendees than we anticipated. We pulled chairs, obviously, but we were close to compromising the accessibility in the room just by the sheer number of people in there. But it turned out all right. We had no complaints, and it was accessible to everyone. We did select as part of our volunteers people to be placed strategically in that room to provide assistance to anybody who needed it, including at the snack table for whatever need people had. The format of the forum, not pertaining to accessibility particularly, was that it was not a debate, but each candidate appeared on the stage with a moderator individually. I do think that does address accessibility for clarity purposes. I think it can be confusing in a debate, ping-ponging back between one candidate and the other. Each candidate received the same questions as the others. They did not receive the questions prior to the event. They just received topic areas. The video projection was captioned in the room by CART, and we had interpreters available too, who rotated. One reason we decided to do the video captioning was that we could do a live webcast. There were a lot of people who couldn't attend the event due to transportation issues or time issues or medical issues. So we did live broadcast it by Facebook because Facebook was the most cost-effective and most broadly available to most people. That made sure that those who couldn't attend were able to participate. We knew that there were some watch parties at some of the CILs across the state as well. We did have a moderator for the event. We had a keynote speaker who was John Kemp. He's a nationally recognized advocate and activist. Most of you probably know him. We knew that John or whoever we selected for a keynoter would be important for people to have additional incentive to be there, to be motivated. He motivated on the engagement of people with disabilities in the community to be more engaged in the political process. We had an MC for flow control of the event itself. If there were lulls in the program, she filled in and kind of kept the continuity of everything. I won't get into how we did the candidate outreach and candidate questions unless someone wants to know that at the end and ask specific questions about that. With regard to the event promotion, I think that's been covered extensively already, although I did hear some areas where we could have done better. We worked with a professional designer who has a disability himself. Some of you might know Dan Wilkins. He designed the logo, the outreach flyer, and the program for us. Most of our outreach was electronic. It helped us to ensure more that the documents were going to be accessible to people. We also used the PDFs, which I wasn't familiar with before, Sarah, in Adobe InDesign, so that we made sure that everybody had access to those. So some of the challenges, just generally speaking, I think we did a pretty upstanding job of the accessibility piece, but beyond that, so that people could be aware. If you're doing a forum, you know that you can please some of the people some of the time, but not all of the people all of the time. So we ended up having a couple of surrogates because the Senate was in session, and as I said, we had 2 incumbents. They both sent surrogates, but a lot of people weren't happy with that. People weren't happy that the Green Party wasn't included. We had some issues with one of the candidates not preferring the moderator we chose. We had hired a PR firm, a public relations firm, to handle media outreach and do some coordinating with the candidates. In the end, that PR firm turned out to be a little more partisan than we would have preferred. There were some issues pertaining to that. But in the end, we got high marks, I believe, and we're encouraged to do this again. So we will do this again in 2 years. That's it.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sue. And now, Tarika.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tarika Jennings with the DC Board of Elections. I am the ADA coordinator, but I'm also the attorney advisor for the board. So I wear a couple of hats. I guess in essence, in a nutshell, I deal with all things having to do with people with disabilities, reasonable accommodations, senior citizens, as well as language access. You can go to the next slide. So I am gonna talk about accessible communication, but just for those of you who aren't familiar with the Board of Elections, we do place a lot of high value on making sure that our elections are accessible. We of course place a lot of emphasis in ensuring that we have accessible polling sites. We have a voter access team that goes out. We ensure that we have a lot of signage available that's accessible to our voters that come out. We offer curbside voting to ensure that voters who are unable by reason of age or disability and they can't access our polling site, they can, vote from outside. We have a very accessible voting machine that we chose with the assistance of the National Federation of the Blind. And we'll talk about that shortly because that also helps us in how we communicate with our voters. As I mentioned, we do provide voting assistance for our voters on election day. We have an election day hotline, and we also offer several types of language access services for our voters who don't speak English as a first language. I think Sue spoke earlier about the forum that she had. I just want to mention that we'll be having our own voter access forum on October 10th, starting at 10 a.m. here at the DC Board of Elections. If you're around town at that time, or if you work with an organization locally, please stop by. All right, so next slide, please.
And Tarika, really quickly, could you just describe the image that's on this slide for folks?
Yes, I will. And, as Sarah mentioned earlier, all the images in my document, all the pictures, everything has alternative text. So if you have this and you have access to this, you'll be able to also see the descriptions. So the diagram that he's mentioning is basically just a little chart that shows all the different services that I mentioned just now, starting with our accessible polling site, curbside voting, accessible voting machines, voter access, voter assistance, election day hotline, and language access. And I'll describe all the other pictures, but for those of you who will have access to this electronically, you'll be able to also see the descriptions via the alt text. Next slide, please. Okay, so it's showing up on your screen a little bit different than we have it over here on our PowerPoint, but I'll read through everything for those of you who are listening and don't have access to this. Here at the Board of Elections, because we have to interact with so many individuals and we provide, voting information and education, we do provide our stuff in several formats. But before we even go into how we present our information, I do want to make sure that you guys are aware that before we can get to disseminating the information, we place some emphasis on just the etiquette portion, how we actually interact with our voters. We teach our staff members or part-time staff members or ward coordinators who are people who go out to provide information. We do provide them with disability etiquette training, which of course includes people first language, because that's one of the things that for me is very problematic when I see candidates as well as just individuals who want to help to increase voter turnout when they use language that's not appropriate. So we make sure that our staff and our part-time folks, they are aware of people first language so they're not offending anyone when they go out to represent the board. As far as the materials that we send out, some of this stuff, Sarah did an awesome job covering, so I'm not going to go into too much details because she already covered it, but I'll tell you what we do here at the board. So when I present voter education materials at different events, or when I send them out with our ward coordinators, for example, we send them in different formats. So we will do, for example, Braille, large print, or electronic. So yesterday, for example, I had a voter outreach event, a voter education event. I presented with the to the Disability Community Outreach Collaborative here in DC, and I made sure that I sent over my presentation and all the handouts electronically, you know, a day or two before the end. I sent it over a day or two before the event so that all the participants, many of whom were blind, would have access to it before the day of the event. In addition to sending over the material electronically and all the handouts, etc., I also provided the information in Braille as well as large print. So they had that. For us, we also use technology as a way for us to educate our voters and to communicate with our voters. And so our website pretty much houses all our information. We just had our website redone this year, which included all the fancy website stuff that Sarah mentioned. So our website is now accessible. In addition to redoing our website with our local technology body here, we also made sure that we incorporated the folks from the Lighthouse, folks from the National Federation of the Blind, like the local folks, and a couple of other people who we use as testers, auditors, to make sure that our site was accessible. And we did that for several weeks before we actually made our site live, to ensure that all their assistive technology and all their assistive devices were able to work and are be in sync with our new website. We also place that same level of or the same need for accessibility on our social media platform. For example, we're on Twitter, Facebook. We have an app called Vote for DC, the number 4. Those platforms, if we post pictures or any documents, they're also posted in an accessible format with, of course, the alt text, as we mentioned before. And of course, our voting machine, our express voting machine, has everything that you can think of to make someone be able to use it in an accessible way. It has large print, you can contrast the screen, etc. But we'll talk about that more shortly. In addition to how we communicate with our voters, we don't have any type of outreach event or even voting or election day events without having assistive devices available for the voters when we present them with information. So we have like magnifying glasses, headphones, assistive listening devices. These things are also available when we have poll worker training. We train over 3,000 poll workers during each election season. So we have those on site. We also have the capability of incorporating, for example, a sip and puff for folks that use sip and puff devices. They can use that with our voting machines as well. As for our training videos, so we use like a training video for different sections of our poll worker training classes. All those videos have closed caption, as Sarah mentioned all the details about that. We do provide closed caption. We also make sure that we have a lot of visual literacy embedded in our training material and our voter outreach material, because it helps for folks that, for example, aren't literate. They're able to see pictures and connect it with the information that's being presented to them. So we like to incorporate lots of pictures, especially in, for example, our training manual. I'm not sure how many of you have ever seen our DC Board of Elections training manual. We use lots of pictures. So for example, if we're talking about how you put together or doorbells, we have step-by-step instructions, but we also have pictures that depict every single instruction that we have we have available for our poll workers. And finally, I don't think we can talk about accessible communication without also mentioning language access services. So we ensure that we have sign language interpreters at all public events. We have sign language interpreters available at various polling sites on election day, especially any polling site that is close to Gallaudet University. That way our voters are able to receive the information that they want, and they're able to effectively communicate with our staff. We also have our materials translated into multiple languages, as well as the ballot is, when you're on our express vote machines, you're able to translate the ballot from English to Spanish just by hitting one button. Next slide, please. So some of this stuff I'm going to go over real quickly because, again, Sarah covered a lot of this information. I'll just talk to you guys about how we use it here at the board. Again, we make sure that we're using Microsoft, which is probably the easiest platform that's out there, to ensure that we are providing accessible documents for our website, as well as to just disseminate when we have different events. And so, for example, PDF documents, as Sarah mentioned, that's an accessible way for you to present information. If you're running a campaign and you want to, reach out to your voters, make sure you're posting your information in an accessible way and post it in PDF format. Otherwise, when you just post this stuff to the website, it's going to just look like a big mark to someone. It's not going to be able to read it. It's not going to be able to communicate what you're trying to say to that person. Now, while many people, while people can assert that they're, for example, legally blind, of course, most people aren't 100%. Not everyone is 100% blind. So we think about that when we do present our information. So we don't just focus on Braille because lots of people can't read Braille. In fact, when we provide Braille for many of our events, we notice that a lot of people don't take the Braille information. In fact, most people don't. I'll have like 1 or 2 people that will ask to use the Braille. So we always offer the information electronically. And alternatively, we also provide our information in large print at all our events. Even on election day, our sample ballots are available in large print for our voters. And again, we send out all our electronic documents ahead of time so people have the ability to see them and read them before they get to the event, or to use them during the event. Next slide, please.
Just really quickly, Tarika, could you describe the image on this slide? Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. So again, they have all text for those of you who receive them electronically. The pictures on this site, the first one just depicts Braille, someone reading Braille. The other one depicts a large print symbol that just shows someone reading a document with a magnifying glass. And it just shows that it's also in large print. I also have a copy of just the Office of Disability Rights. Their logo is there. And the reason why I incorporated them, and I should have mentioned that if you are a local disability rights organization, the Office of Disability Rights is a great resource for you to reach out to. They print documents for you in Braille in small quantities. So you can just send your Word document to them and they'll print it out for you in Braille, and you can just pick it up from their office. So we do reach out to them. In addition to that, if you go to some of the local DC libraries, they'll also print documents for you in Braille. And I have a picture of a sample ballot here as well. Okay, on the next slide, I have 4 pictures. And the alt text for the first one is just web accessibility. I'm not going to spend any time on that because I think Sarah did a great job talking about how you should approach web accessibility for your campaign. And then I just have the general logos for Twitter and Facebook and for our Vote for DC symbol. As far as how we communicate with our voters, we try to make sure that we have the same information on all our platforms. So on Facebook, on Twitter, on our voting app, we'll disseminate the same information as far as election day coming up on November 6th. The deadline for you to submit your voter registration, the deadline for you to submit a request for an absentee ballot, all that stuff is posted. And again, we try to keep it in the same format. So even if we do post pictures and anything, it's in alt text. We use very simple language, plain language as well, to make sure that everyone understands what we're trying to say. I'm going to skip over all the stuff having to do with the accessible website because, again, Sarah covered that. We also embed all our information that's on our social media platforms on our actual website. And the reason I wanted them to do that was so there's a one-stop shop. So if you're, for example, at home and you're using a screen reader, you're not having to do so many clicks. You're not having to go to several different sites and different platforms to receive our information. It's in one central location. Next slide, please. On this slide, I have a picture of our express voting system. It's our voting machine that we have here. Again, this machine allows our voters to vote independently, and of course it's accessible. We picked this machine with the National Federation of the Blind, and this machine allows an individual who is blind to vote independently. So that individual can vote by, first of all, using the audio. It has a great audio feature. You're able to increase the volume. You're able to turn it down. You're able to change the tempo to make it faster or slower. You're also able to vote using Braille. It does have Braille on the actual tablet system, and you have Braille on the actual machine that you can use. And alternatively, you are able to use the different buttons on the tactile pad to vote even if you can't read Braille, because each button has an individually a different shape, I'm sorry. Display varies in colors, so you're able to vote that way. If you have any type of visual disability, you can contrast the screen. You can change the colors as far as what works best for you. You're able to touch the screen if you have any type of dexterity related disability. You are able to adjust the contrast, as I mentioned, as well as the text size. So if you need to increase the words on the on the machine, you can do that as well. Voters are also able to use headphones even if they don't have a visual disability, in order for them to get the information right to them. So if you're someone who can't read, for example, that information can also be read to you from start to finish. You can pause it, you can go back, you can have the information reread, so it's quite accessible. And again, in addition to having all those features, if you have your own individual or personal assistive device like a sip and puff machine, or if you have your own headphones, anything, you're able to incorporate those with your machines by simply plugging it in, and there's a portion for that at the front. Finally, on our machines, and we allow voters to receive information in both Spanish and English. And we are working to have that in several other languages, but right now it's just Spanish and English. Next slide, please. All right, so the next slide is about how we communicate or how we help folks to communicate with us and how we're able to help them to receive the information from us. On this screen, we have a picture of a magnifying glass, an assistive listening device, a set of headphones, as well as a sip and puff device. We provide during our voter outreach events and during our poll worker training events and on election day, we always have magnifying glasses at our check-in table as well as our voter assistance table. And we find that people use them a lot, because if you come in, you're not able to see the information because it's small, you have a visual disability, you are able to use those. And we also have, while we don't have sip and puff devices in our office, we do teach our staff about how to use those and how to assist our voters with those. Headphones are a big deal to us. When you walk into a precinct, every single precinct has headphones attached to the machines, so voters are also able to get information that way, and they don't have to wait around for someone to come over and read the information to them. And I guess it's because, it's because we want to emphasize independent voting and just independently being able to receive the information that you want. Next slide, please. Okay, so again, Sarah already covered closed captioning, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this. We have an orientation video that we provide at each one of our sessions here, and that video is also captioned because we want to ensure that voters, no matter who you are, if you are deaf or hard of hearing, you're able to receive that information. We also have descriptive words on screen along with our pictures to make sure that there's visual literacy. In addition to that, we use a disability etiquette video that was created by the Office of Disability Rights. And of course, that video also has closed caption that are in order for our voters to be able to receive that information. We use it at our outreach events, we use it at our poll worker training classes, and we use it when we train our in-house staff as well. Next slide. All right, so one of the ways how we ensure that we are effectively communicating with our voters and presenting voting information and voting education is by ensuring that we have sign language interpreters whenever we have public events. So for example, I'm having our voter access forum on October 10th. We've already submitted our stuff to have sign language interpreters available here for us. When I have big events like those, I don't really just wait for someone to request a sign language interpreter. I always just have someone on staff, because because sometimes individuals don't remember to request one ahead of time, and I would hate for someone to show up and not have a sign language interpreter available for them. Also, on election day, we have several polling sites that are staffed with sign language interpreters, and if you're voting in DC and you need some information that you're unable to receive by virtue of, writing down your question or having someone write the answer to you, something more complicated, we'll have a sign language interpreter sent to your location as well. And we also have multi-language interpreters available. So in DC, we have to provide voter education and voter information in Spanish, Mandarin, Amharic, Korean, French, English, I don't think I missed any, Vietnamese. And so we have interpreters that are able to help voters in all those languages available on election day. Next slide, please. In addition to that, I should mention that when individuals contact our office for information, they are able to get that information in the languages that I just mentioned earlier. And that's under the DC Language Access Act. On this slide, I have a picture of a vote here sign that has the words written in Mandarin and Spanish and English. Underneath that, I have a little chart that has need your help in your language, along with our phone number in all 6 languages that I just mentioned. A big part of what we do is ensure that DC is a melting pot. So we have folks here from all over the world. And so we place a lot of emphasis on ensuring that we can communicate with everyone in the city. So one of the ways we're able to do that is via language line, which is basically a personal interpreters that are available via phone. Our staff is trained on how to do this. They're able to contact language line, let the interpreter know what language they're seeking, get someone on the phone and communicate with our voter if they're here in person, or on a 3-way line if they're on the phone. On election day, all our captains are equipped with cell phones, and they're able to do the same thing. So it doesn't matter if you don't speak any of the 6 languages I mentioned. So any language you speak, we're able to contact language line to provide you with whatever education or material that you're looking for, information that you're looking for. In addition to helping us communicate more effectively, we hire lots of bilingual poll workers. We also have translated signs, translated voting materials. So we have one document, for example, that's called What Every Voter Needs to Know. That document is translated into multiple languages as well. And for our voter guide, which also provides a lot of information, we have that document available, and voters can request that document in whatever language that they speak, predominantly the 6 that I just mentioned. And all our signs are bilingual. So if you're, for example, in a part of the city where we have a predominant number of folks who speak Amharic, so in like our big Ethiopian neighborhoods, you'll see Amharic signs mostly. If you're in another area that has folks that speak Spanish, you'll see more Spanish signs, etc. Actually, I think that was my last slide. So in general, for us, the whole concept of providing voter information in different formats, it covers not just people with disabilities, but also folks that don't speak English, or people who I guess cross both lines. So we just want to ensure that everyone has information, especially because the elections is fast approaching. It's going to be on November 6th, and early voting actually starts on October 22nd, I'm sorry. If you are other members of your campaign or other members of your disability rights organization needs information in an alternative format, we have a FAQ, which is our frequently asked question document on our website, which is www.dcboe.org. And it provides information for individuals who have disabilities, senior citizens, and those seeking language access services. And it pretty much answers any question you can think of as far as those demographics are concerned. But if you want to reach out to us, please do that. And we will be happy to share our information electronically or in some other format that's most accessible for the group you're trying to reach. If you have any questions, please let me know.
All right. So I want to thank all of our presenters today. This is really, really wonderful information. Are there any folks that have questions?
I was wondering if you have your poll worker trainings available publicly, or the materials you use for that, because it sounds like you have some really good best practices for disability inclusion. And I think that could potentially be a model for many other Board of Elections offices or election directors on disability inclusion.
Yes, I have, but I don't post it online because sometimes I'll make little edits and I'll have to reprint for my staff or send it out electronically. But yes, I do have a PowerPoint that I typically use and adjust throughout the election season, and that's available if you or someone else wants to see a copy of that. I'm happy to share it. I have shared it with different organizations who use it to help individuals overseas create their own disability etiquette training program for their workers and for their staff. So yes, I'm happy to share that. We also have our in-house manual available for voters. I have a hard copy available for not a hard copy. I've made a copy of it electronically for individuals that need it. However, we are working on creating a process where everything is online as opposed to just simply giving the information in hard copy when people come to class, because obviously that would not be accessible for someone who's blind to give them a hard copy of the document. But as far as my training portion is concerned, it's always available electronically, in large print or in alternative colors for someone who needs it to be, printed in another format.
Great, thank you.
Our poll worker training classes are open to whomever signs up, so people can come in just to observe, which we do have. I've had several people from different disability rights organizations ask to come in to kind of audit our class, to give us feedback, to tell us what they like, what they think we could change or include or speak about more. Our class breaks it down. We in our classes we talk about, of course, the people first language and just the general disability etiquette portion about how you talk to folks, and we break it down by various disabilities. We also spend a lot of time talking about polling place accessibility, and so it kind of covers all those major topics. And then we have an entire 2-hour session that's simply about how you post the signs, how you make the routes accessible. And so our stuff is more operational accessibility as well as structural accessibility, how we help everyone get into our polling sites and vote independently on election day.
Great, this is wonderful information. Are there any other questions? If not, then I'm going to hand this over to Zach Baldwin from AAPD to close us out. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Ted. And thank you again to our presenters and for everyone joining us today. And then our next webinar is coming up on October 18th, and that one will be focused on access barriers to actually voting, whether that's going into a polling place, voting absentee, and using alternative ballot formats. And thank you again for joining us today.